Welcome to our next episode of Reflective Account Sports Sponsorship. I'm Eddie Koppoe, and let's get straight into it. So in terms of how the sort of year has gone, I've decided to sort of group the last two reflections together and kind of look back at things in sort of a monthly overview. So this episode we'll take some sort of key themes that I was sort of interested in exploring and kind of reflecting on those as well. So a few points that I thought I wanted to address as we're kind of getting to at the midpoint of the sort of semester in terms of content and things we've covered. So something sort of major I've learned is the assets in terms of a sponsorship proposal and how really and truly intricate it can be. I think it's something that people probably overlook, and until it's something that you do yourself and have a looking, there's so many things that essentially an event, for example, can sell and can use that to help their sponsor achieve their goals. So one thing I wanted to do was keep on top of work this year a lot better than I did last semester in terms of the reflective account. Also wanted to try and push myself to bring discussions up in class a little bit more, and kind of raise your hand and speak. And I did mention that at the beginning of the semester, and I think I've done myself well in terms of that. Risk for me was the sort of the video portfolio. It's hopefully we'll get onto it within the next episode, definitely the final one in terms of how this sort of process has gone and reflect on that. But definitely this was a big risk, especially with the 3P25 and the 2P91, and doing them both together definitely has been challenging. And the main thing that when I looked at sponsorship as a course or to take at the beginning of the year, kind of the thing I wanted to know was how does a proposal work, and how does the process look in terms of that. I think we've done a fair bit of work through that this year. That's one thing I was looking forward to learning at the beginning of the course. So in class we discussed how companies that may not have a good relationship with the public, and we discussed things about what they can do to make consumers feel better. So I wanted to have a look at that and kind of explore. I sort of picked up on a few things about how companies can sort of make consumers feel better about their purchase, and how that also ties in with sports sponsorship. So one of the things that you see a lot of companies doing, we discussed it last year, is about start before they're even customers, and we can link that into the sort of continuum in terms of allegiance and attainment within sport. But I think it's important for both the sponsor and sponsee to both play a part in designing the customer experience. We've seen this with a sport team. So Professor Hyatt mentioned in one of his classes that he went to go see a sporting game outside of obviously outside the city where he lives, and they managed to get his postcode somehow. I don't know if it's through the ticket company or whatever, and through that they were able to offer him hotel and flights deals, because they know that he was coming from out of town. And with a different postcode, of course, if someone who lives locally, it makes less sense to offer them deals on flights. So understanding things like that can definitely help if you have things like transport sponsors or accommodation sponsors. Using that information will definitely help in terms of that customer experience and making sure that they get looked after. Again, being authentic. So we did discuss a lot about Twitter and social media, and how consumers are now sort of able to have that relationship. And live sports is great for this, and it really helps with companies or organizations that don't have much of a dialogue, such as like banks or insurance companies, through a sporting event, a live sporting event, we're able to see a bit more of an interaction between them two. So things like we've seen like a little blimp that will go around the arena. They will be an insurance company, and they may drop something in terms of something that's going to make the consumer feel good about that product. And again, that's where the team and the sponsor can come together and design that experience for the customer. So another way of seeing this done is sort of in surveys, so focus groups, email and web forums, and again with social media. That's sort of another way that you can help your brand associate better with consumers. And then finally, a solid relationship. I think we talked about in class sort of these unethical companies, and in terms of things like maybe gas and fuel, and how they may have more of a challenge to come across um, in a good light to consumers. Well, quite interestingly, it's quite hard to find any major sponsors of of a sporting team or athlete or event that and the fuel and gas provider were a main sponsor. I think closest thing was I think ExxonMobil had an event, or they sponsored that. But it's quite interesting how maybe teams and organizations are savvy to that, and perhaps it's a little bit more difficult to help a sort of maybe fuel company or gas company reach their goals in terms of better perception in the public. But definitely, as you can see, sort of sport and activation and the design of the fan experience can definitely help with that in some cases. So we again in class discussed how injuries can affect sponsorship, along with sort of the player athlete performance. Also, injuries can have a part in that as well. We've seen organizations leave teams if a big player goes down or leaves as well. Although it's been quite difficult to find sort of concrete examples of that. So perhaps it's a comment to how organizations are able to kind of slip away with sort of without people seeing them in that case. But I wanted to kind of bring up this example here with the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James. So I was kind of pondering, I wanted to kind of reflect and wonder. So Goodyear started their sponsorship with the Cleveland Cavaliers after LeBron James left for the Los Angeles Lakers, the LA Lakers. I was wondering if there was sort of any conclusions that could be brought up to in terms of a company joining a team after a big athlete has gone. Was that a coincidence, or was it more thought out? And in terms of sort of saturation, so if there's a big athlete such as LeBron at a team, they may receive more sponsors, and although you'll get more eyes because of his stature as an athlete, there perhaps is going to be more traffic in terms of brands and images and things like that. So now LeBron's left Cleveland. He may have taken, so obviously, that spotlight with him, and he may have taken some additional sponsors with him. So could it be that Goodyear have come in here and look to sort of take advantage of perhaps a clean slate in terms of Cleveland? Again, it's hard to kind of find examples of that, and like I said, I think they're the companies are quite savvy in terms of this, of how they move about quite silently at times, and not bring any attention to themselves. So with the Super Bowl obviously being around February time, we got onto the topic about ambush marketing, and it's something that always gets mentioned throughout SPMA courses, especially with the marketing and sales and promotion, and of course sponsorship. So I kind of wanted to again apply that in something that I've seen a little bit. And the Little Caesars, of course, the pizza company, they were doing some ambush marketing on more of a local level, So they were doing stuff around the big game, and in quotation marks there, because of course they're not allowed to actually say Super Bowl, so they're kind of taking advantage of that. Everyone knows what the big game is. You don't need to even say it. That's the advantage there. So sort of the pros for Little Caesars are organizational control, so they don't need to follow any rules in terms of the sponsorship, and they can kind of piggyback on whatever's being done, and they're not bound by any deals or anything that they may have with the lead sponsor. Again, that kind of leads into a creative license, so they have ability to do anything in terms of deals. Of course, they're a food company. The example kind of I wanted to look at is if Pepsi are the official sponsor drink of the NFL. So could there be a case where other food providers who are sponsored or sponsoring the Super Bowl, is there any sort of infractions with they can't do any deals with like food deals or advertise food deals with Coke? Because if they're advertising at the Super Bowl and the NFL's official partners for soft drink partners, Pepsi or PepsiCo, then yeah, I think the Coca-Cola brand can't be close. So I wonder if there's any sort of legislation with that, perhaps not. But it's not a problem for Little Caesars. Again, they don't have to worry about anything like that. And of course, it's cost effective. So a Super Bowl commercial, this Super Bowl 53, just gone in February. A 30-second commercial would have cost a company between 4.5 and 5 million. So of course Little Caesars didn't have to pay for that. Of course that's just a TV advert. There's more activation that goes on around the Super Bowl, but they didn't have to get anywhere near that. In terms of drawbacks, so again it relies, as much as you have all control of yourself, it relies on of what everyone else is doing. So of course you actually need someone to come up with the original idea. And then you need to have sort of the atmosphere around it for you to just call it the big game and people know what to talk about. If it happened in March and they mentioned the big game, well, perhaps they'd be talking about March Madness. But again, it's the Super Bowl isn't it's a unique one because it's big enough for a company just to use something vague and people know what they talk about. And then of course they have no partnership benefits. So they even though they're ambushing marketing, they don't have any other benefits that the NFL can offer them. Maybe in terms of other exposure or anything like that. Or of course exclusivity, because the official pizza sponsor, oh well, not anymore, but just as of late, but it was Papa John's. So again, they wouldn't benefit from that exclusivity. And lastly, it is difficult to get right. You want to obviously take advantage of the situation as much as you can without getting in trouble or kind of confusing consumers about what's going on. So yeah, ambushing is not an easy task to get right. So the topic came up about global value, and that some athletes have a better global value than others. So I wanted to kind of look into this and kind of see where it is and what athletes came in, and definitely from what sports. So of course, Roger Federer, who's obviously a well-known tennis superstar, is on top. And is it possible that we can draw conclusions to tennis getting the most global value in terms of a sport? Is this something that is consistent with the world, or is that just Roger Federer's brand? Has he just been very successful with it? It's something again that I'm going to try and look into, but perhaps most would say that tennis isn't sort of the most global sport, or definitely not the most watched sport in terms of that. But I think as well, what's also interesting is the sort of athletes and their sports. So we've got basketball, athletics, football, associated football, cricket, golf, and yes. And what is interesting, so we don't have any NFL, baseball, or NHL players on the team. So NFL more than anything else, because it's out of the big four in North American sports, it's the sport that has the least amount of foreign players, and you can see that on the surface level. You don't really need any facts. Like if you've already watched the 2P9 one portfolio, reflection, we discussed about athletes from other countries and how that looks in the NBA. So like I mentioned about Giannis Antetokounmpo from Greece, and then as well in the NHL, there's a lot of European players in there. But again, with the NFL, it's mainly just North Americans, mainly Americans, the United States nationals, who play in there, and I think that does hurt in terms of brand or worldwide view, because with basketball, people from different countries are watching because there is at least one player from their country who's in there. So, like I said, if we take Dirk Nowitzki, for example, German people in Germany are going to watch in the NBA because one of the best players in the league happens to be a German. But we don't quite see the benefits of that in the National Football League because of the lack of disparity in nationals. And in terms of like the brand, again, we discussed a little bit in the other podcast, but things like David Beckham and what they do in terms of expanding their brand while they're playing, in terms of him obviously moving to LA Galaxy, and that kind of helped his brand. Of course, we've seen a lot of football players here who've just played in one country or just one continent for a lot of their time, but because football is such a global sport, they're able to benefit from that, and makes their brand a bit more valuable. So finally, I wanted to take a look at the things we discussed about image transfer in class, and apply it to our sponsorship proposal. So if it hasn't been discussed already, we're looking at BioSteel and the Royal or the Henley Regatta. Royal Canadian's actually the current sponsor. The Henley Regatta and partnering with BioSteel. So wanted to kind of share again how that kind of came up in our discussions. So sort of this identification. So pairing the two together, the regatta is a highly respected event with a lot of prestige, and BioSteel are currently trying to, well, through their actions already and kind of their mission statement, trying to uphold the sort of the same image in terms of that prestige. But interestingly enough, in terms of identification, it's hard. I would say it's hard for the sponsorship to affect people's esteem, and it's something that was discussed. And I don't know how that would work in terms of the partnership and how that would affect people's self-esteem. Maybe it's something that we have to figure out a little bit more. The attitudes sort of towards the commercialization. So obviously we're just looking at one sponsor, so the event isn't going to be sort of heavily saturated with other brands and other images. And due to kind of the free giveaways that we proposed for BioSteel, and like I said, from what they've done already, we thought that the product would be received really well. Excuse me, especially with a younger audience who are less likely to be offended or less likely to realize that they're being quote unquote sold to. So the free merchandise will kind of help with BioSteel's image, and it will hopefully help and have a positive image transfer with that. I think with the older generation, they sometimes feel that or offended that they're being sold to. Again, Professor Hyatt mentioned in this class how the team eludes me, but one team never wanted to accept sort of cremative bobbleheads if they had a sponsor's logo on it, because it's almost like, well, this doesn't mean anything to us. It's not coming from the team. It's just a money grabbing thing, and we're just trying to be sold to. And those attitudes are quite interesting. It's something that sport managers need to understand. But in terms of the younger generation and how things are now, I think we as a younger society or generation, we're not as offended as probably our parents were in terms of being sold to. Event brand fit, it's pretty. We were pretty happy with this, and we thought this was pretty successful. So it's sort of logical. Bio's still been working with mostly professionals and top end athletes, and they also wanted to look about competitive competition. So again, if you've read our proposal, they've looked at doing the all Canada basketball game. They've done some soccer under 19 soccer competitions. So they're all about getting involved with the competition and getting their brand there as well. And again, this is what we did, and we thought that was a really good fit. Then lastly, sort of the sponsorship clutter. So again, with sort of the attitudes towards commercialization, yeah, there's little saturation there. So their brand will be front and center and available for all to see. So hopefully that will help with that. And with that, we've come to the end of this episode. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next episode.